3,500 feet over Khe Sanh combat base, a single O-1 bird dog circles through morning haze, while 40,000 NVA troops tighten their siege below. The pilot's radio crackles with 16 different strike flights inbound: F-4 Phantoms, A-1 Sky Raiders, Marine A-4 Seconds, and AC-47 gunships, all converging on a 5-mile perimeter with no ground-based controller and no radar to separate them. What the North Vietnamese artillery spotters dismiss as one unarmed spotter plane is about to become an airborne command post that will vector, stack, deconflict, and deliver nearly 300 precision strikes before sunset, turning chaos into choreography and proving that a single calm voice with a map and a stopwatch can multiply firepower far beyond the sum of its parts. Khe Sanh sits in the northwestern corner of South Vietnam, 6 miles from the Laotian border and 14 miles south of the DMZ. The combat base occupies a plateau roughly 3,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by ridgelines that rise another 1,500 feet higher. By mid-January 1968, 2 NVA divisions, the 304th and the 325C, have encircled the base, emplacing 130mm and 152mm artillery in caves along Ko Rock Mountain, across the border, and digging trench networks within a mile of the marine wire. The siege begins in earnest on January 20th, when NVA gunners open fire at 0530 hours, detonating the main ammunition dump and cutting the base off from overland resupply. From that moment forward, everything that sustains Khe Sanh, ammunition, water, medical supplies, reinforcements, must arrive by air. The Marine garrison numbers roughly 6,000 men, supported by a single runway that measures 3,900 feet long and paved with pierced steel planking. C-130 Hercules transports can land under fire, but only in daylight and only when cloud ceilings permit visual approach. Helicopters face dense small arms fire below 1,500 feet and cannot carry enough cargo to sustain the base alone. The solution becomes a continuous air umbrella. Strike aircraft must suppress NVA guns before transports land, destroy trench lines before ground assaults develop, and interdict supply routes along Route 9 and the Ho Chi Minh Trail to prevent reinforcement. Coordinating this requires a forward air controller aloft from dawn to dusk, managing a sky that fills with dozens of aircraft every hour, each with different speeds, fuel endurance, ordnance loads, and mission priorities. The O-1 Bird Dog represents the simplest possible platform for the mission. It is a 2-seat, high-wing observation aircraft, powered by a single 213-horsepower piston engine, cruising at 85 knots and capable of loitering for 3 hours on internal fuel. The cockpit holds a pilot, a map, a grease pencil, a stopwatch, and 4 UHF/VHF radios. Armament consists of 4 white phosphorus marking rockets under the wings, smoke markers, not weapons. The Bird Dog carries no radar, no autopilot, no defensive systems, and no armor. Its ceiling tops out around 15,000 feet, but most FAC work happens between 2,000 and 5,000 feet, where the pilot can see both the target and the strike aircraft. At Khe Sanh, that altitude puts the O-1 within range of every NVA anti-aircraft gun on the ridgelines. 12.7mm heavy machine guns, effective to 6,000 feet, 23mm and 37mm autocannon reaching 8,000 feet, and occasional 57mm flak bursting above 10,000 feet. What the Bird Dog lacks in capability, it compensates with persistence and geometry. A jet fighter screams overhead at 400 knots, sees the target for seconds, and must egress immediately after ordnance release to avoid ground fire. The FAC circles slowly enough to watch shell impacts, adjust aim points, and talk the next flight onto a different piece of the same trench. The pilot becomes the only continuous observer of the battlefield, the only voice that knows which hilltop was hit 10 minutes ago and which gun pit is still shooting. That continuity transforms the FAC from a spotter into a conductor, orchestrating tempo and sequence across dozens of independent flights. The challenge at Khe Sanh is not scarcity but density. 7th Air Force commits hundreds of daily sorties to the defense of the base, augmented by marine aviation from Chu Lai and Da Nang, Navy strike packages from carriers on Yankee Station, and B-52 Arc Light missions dropping from 30,000 feet. On a typical day in late January, the airspace within 10 miles of Khe Sanh holds F-4 Phantoms carrying 12 500-pound bombs, A-4 Skyhawks with napalm canisters, A-1 Sky Raiders loaded with cluster munitions and 20mm cannon, Marine F-4Bs with Rockeye anti-armor bomblets, AC-47 gunships mounting 3 7.62mm miniguns, and occasional fast movers diverted from route pack missions in North Vietnam. Each type flies at different airspeeds. A-ON's second cruise at 180 knots, 4 seconds at 350 knots minimum, and each carries fuel for different loiter times. Phantoms burn through their gas in 30 minutes over target. Sky Raiders can orbit for 2 hours. Without a ground-based radar controller, separation depends entirely on the FAC's mental picture. He must stack flights vertically, Phantoms at 15,000 feet, Sky Raiders at 8,000, gunships at 5,000, and sequence them temporally so that one flight's bomb run does not intersect another's egress path. He must also deconflict with artillery, Marine 105mm and 155mm howitzers inside the base fire continuously, their shells arcing overhead along trajectories that cross the same airspace where strike aircraft descend. The FAC coordinates with the Fire Support Coordination Center to carve time windows. Artillery ceases fire for 90 seconds while a flight rolls in, then resumes the moment the jets pull off target. Managing this requires constant radio work across 4 frequencies: strike common for inbound flights, ground tactical for marine forward observers, artillery net for fire coordination, and emergency guard for mayday calls. The NVA understands the importance of the FAC and dedicates anti-aircraft resources to shooting him down. A bird dog flying predictable circles at 3,000 feet offers an easy target for trained gunners. The pilot counters by varying altitude, never completing a full orbit in the same plane, and using terrain masking, dipping behind ridgelines to break line of sight before climbing again from a different angle. He also exploits weather, low clouds and haze that obscure the base from strike aircraft, also obscure the FAC from ground observers, allowing him to work below the overcast where jets cannot follow. When visibility drops below a mile, the FAC becomes the only American eyes on the battlefield, marking targets with smoke rockets and talking jets onto the smoke through solid cloud. The NVA's second countermeasure is camouflage and dispersion. Artillery positions along Khe Rock sit inside natural caves with overhead cover thick enough to defeat 500-pound bombs. Only direct hits into the cave mouth achieve effect. Trench lines zigzag to limit blast propagation, and gun pits are revetted with logs and sandbags that absorb shrapnel. The FAC must learn to read the landscape. Fresh dirt indicates new digging, trampled grass marks a supply trail, and smoke from cooking fires reveals bunker locations. He also learns to anticipate NVA patterns. Guns that fire at dawn often displace before noon, and trenches that appear empty at 0800. Hours fill with troops by 1600 hours as the NVA prepare for night assault. Effective targeting requires not just finding the enemy, but predicting where he will be when the bombs arrive. Fuel and ordnance define the operational tempo. A Phantom flight of 2 aircraft carries 24 bombs total, and enough fuel for 1 orbit over Khe Sanh, before diverting to a tanker or returning to base. The FAC must have a target ready the moment the flight checks in. Any delay wastes gas and reduces time on station. If weather or ground fire forces a wave off, the flight may lack fuel for a second pass and must jettison ordnance in a safe area or carry it home. Sky Raiders, by contrast, arrive with smaller bomb loads, but longer endurance, allowing the FAC to hold them in a racetrack pattern until a high-priority target appears. A mortar team setting up, a supply column moving in daylight, a gun pit that reveals itself by firing. The FAC's fuel is equally finite. 3 hours of loiter time means he must launch before dawn to cover the morning transport window, land at midday to refuel and brief the next FAC, then launch again for the afternoon shift. Handover happens in the air. The outgoing FAC radios target updates and strike results to his replacement, who copies the information onto his own map while both aircraft circle the base. There is no break in coverage, no gap when the enemy can maneuver freely. The system depends on continuity. Each FAC builds on the work of the previous one, tracking which targets have been hit, which remain, and which new threats have emerged. By the third day of the siege, the NVA have learned that massed movement draws immediate airstrikes. They adapt by moving in smaller groups, using draws and streambeds for concealment, and timing their activity to coincide with weather that grounds American aircraft. The FAC adapts in turn, requesting sensor drops, electronic listening devices, and seismic detectors, airdropped along likely infiltration routes, and coordinating with ground patrols that report enemy positions via radio. The result is a continuous feedback loop. Intelligence from multiple sources funnels to the FAC, who synthesizes it into a target list and matches each target to the appropriate weapon system. Bunkers require heavy bombs or napalm. Troops in the open call for cluster munitions. Gun positions demand precision strikes with delayed fuses to penetrate overhead cover. The FAC also manages risk. Sending a flight against a heavily defended target may cost an aircraft. The pilot must weigh the value of the target against the likelihood of loss. At Khe Sanh, where every gun position threatens the base and every trench line could become an assault route, the calculus favors aggression. The FAC directs strikes against targets that would be marginal elsewhere: a single bunker, a suspected observation post, a section of trench that might be empty. Because the cumulative effect of 300 strikes per day is to deny the NVA freedom of maneuver, they cannot mass for assault, cannot resupply forward positions in daylight, cannot emplace new guns without immediate retaliation. The siege becomes a test of endurance. Which side can sustain losses longer, and which side's logistics will collapse first? The morning of January 21st begins with solid overcast at 4,000 feet and visibility under 2 miles. The FAC launches at 0615 hours, climbing through the cloud deck and emerging into clear air above. Below, the base is invisible, except for occasional breaks in the haze where smoke from cooking fires drifts upward. The first inbound flight, a Marine F-4B section with Rockeye, checks in at 0635 hours, reporting 15 minutes of playtime. The FAC has no visual on the target, a suspected NVA staging area northeast of the base, but he knows the coordinates from yesterday's reconnaissance. He descends below the overcast, finds a gap in the clouds, and fires a smoke rocket at the tree line. The white phosphorus bursts in a plume visible for miles. He radios the phantom lead. Smoke is on the deck at your 12 o'clock. 2 miles. Target is the tree line 50 yards west of the smoke. Roll in heading 270. Pull off left to avoid the ridgeline. The 4 seconds descend through the clouds on instruments, break visual at 2,000 feet, and pickle their Rockeye canisters in a shallow dive. Each canister splits open at 1,500 feet, scattering approximately 250 armor-piercing submunitions across a 100-yard footprint. The FAC watches the tree line erupt in a ripple of small explosions, each bomblet penetrating thin cover and spraying fragments. Secondary explosions follow ammunition or fuel igniting, and the FAC marks the target as destroyed. Total time from check-in to egress, 4 minutes. The next flight arrives before the first has cleared the area. 2A. 1 Sky Raiders, call sign Sandy, carry a mixed load, napalm canisters, 250-pound bombs, and full ammunition for their 420mm cannon. The FAC directs them against a gun position on Hill 881 North that has been shelling the base since dawn. The Sky Raiders are slow enough to orbit below the clouds, and their pilots can see the target without a smoke mark. The FAC clears them hot and watches as the lead aircraft rolls in, releasing 2 napalm canisters that tumble end over end before impacting the hillside in twin fireballs. The jellied gasoline spreads across the gun pit, consuming oxygen and cooking off stored ammunition. The wingman follows with 20mm cannon, stitching the position to suppress any survivors. But the gun pit is a decoy. The real artillery piece sits 200 yards north, concealed under camouflage netting, and it opens fire the moment the Sky Raiders pull off target. The FAC sees muzzle flash and radios immediately. Sandy Lead, new target. You're 11 o'clock, 200 yards north of the napalm. I'm marking now. He dives toward the hillside, launches a smoke rocket, and brakes hard left as tracers arc past his wing. The Sky Raiders wheel around for a second pass, this time dropping 250-pound bombs with instantaneous fuses. The explosions shred the camouflage netting and silence the gun. The FAC logs the kill and notes the NVA's use of decoys, a tactic that will require more careful reconnaissance on future strikes. By 0900 hours, the FAC has controlled 12 flights and expended all 4 of his smoke rockets. He climbs to 5,000 feet to assess the battlefield while waiting for a lull in strike activity. The base perimeter is marked by a continuous belt of craters, some fresh from this morning's strikes, others overlapping from days prior. The NVA trench network extends in a rough semicircle from the northwest to the southeast, with communication trenches running back toward the ridgelines. Smoke rises from a dozen points where strikes have ignited vegetation or secondary explosions. The FAC sketches updates onto his map: destroyed positions in red, active threats in black, suspected locations in blue. A technical explanation helps clarify the FAC's method. The O1's cockpit holds no computer, no moving map display, no data link. Target coordination relies on a 1 to 50,000 topographic map marked with a grid overlay, a grease pencil for annotations, and the pilot's ability to translate between map coordinates and visual references. When a strike flight checks in, the FAC must rapidly determine the target's location relative to known landmarks, a ridgeline, a stream, a destroyed bunker, and communicate that location in terms the pilot can understand. Clock position, distance, and heading. Precision depends on the FAC's spatial memory and his ability to maintain orientation while maneuvering under fire. A single mistake, confusing one hilltop for another, can send bombs into friendly positions or waste ordnance on empty ground. The tempo accelerates as the morning transport window approaches. Cone 130 seconds cannot land while strike aircraft are active over the runway, so the FAC must clear the airspace by 1,000 hours. He sequences the remaining flights in rapid succession: 2 F4 sections against trench lines east of the base, an A4 flight with napalm against a suspected command bunker, and a final Sky Raider pass to suppress anti-aircraft guns along the approach path. Each flight receives a target, a mark, and a pull-off heading designed to keep them separated. The FAC's radio discipline is clipped and precise. Gunfighter 2-1, target is the trench at your 2 o'clock, 1 mile, marked by smoke. In hot, off left, check out with me. The pilot acknowledges, rolls in, and the FAC is already talking to the next flight. At 0958 hours, the last strike flight clears the area, and the FAC radios the tower. Khe Sanh Tower, airspace is clear for transport operations. 2 minutes later, the first C-130 descends through the overcast on a steep tactical approach, touches down, and taxis to the offload point without stopping its engines. Pallets of ammunition and water roll out the rear ramp, while Marines sprint aboard to evacuate wounded. The aircraft is on the ground for 90 seconds before roaring back into the sky. 3 more cone 130 seconds follow in 5-minute intervals. The FAC orbits overhead, watching for muzzle flashes that would indicate the NVA are targeting the transports. None appear. The morning strikes have suppressed the guns within range of the runway. The afternoon shift begins at 1,300 hours with a new FAC in the cockpit and a fresh target list. Intelligence reports indicate NVA troops massing in a draw northwest of the base, likely preparing for a night assault. The FAC requests a heavy strike, a flight of 4 seconds, each carrying 12 500-pound bombs with delayed fuses. The Phantoms check in at 1345 hours, stacked at 15,000, 16,000, 17,000, and 18,000 feet to avoid mid-air collision. The FAC marks the draw with smoke and clears the flight for a time on target attack. All 4 aircraft will release simultaneously so that 48 bombs impact within a 5-second window, overwhelming any overhead cover and preventing the enemy from taking shelter between explosions. The FAC counts down. Gunfighter flight, 30 seconds to release. Lead is cleared hot. 2, you're cleared. 3, cleared. 4, cleared. He watches the Phantoms roll in from different headings, their bomb racks rippling as the ordnance falls away. The bombs arc downward in a shallow trajectory, fuses ticking. At 1,347 hours and 12 seconds, the draw erupts in a continuous line of detonations, each bomb cratering the earth and hurling debris hundreds of feet into the air. The FAC waits for the dust to settle, then descends for battle damage assessment. The draw is unrecognizable. Trees shredded, earth churned, no movement visible. He radios the result. Target destroyed. Estimate 50 to 70 enemy Khe. No secondary explosions observed. As daylight fades, the FAC's role shifts from strike coordination to surveillance and night interdiction. The O-1 lands at 1,730 hours. Its pilot exhausted after 8 hours aloft, and the night mission transfers to an AC-47 Spooky gunship orbiting at 4,500 feet. The Spooky carries 3 side-firing 7.62mm miniguns, each capable of cycling 6,000 rounds per minute, fed from ammunition hoppers holding 21,000 rounds total. The aircraft also mounts a starlight scope and primitive infrared detection gear, crude by later standards, but sufficient to spot campfires, vehicle movement, and muzzle flashes in darkness. The gunship's sensor operator scans the perimeter through the starlight scope, looking for movement along known infiltration routes. At 2,015 hours, he detects a column of soldiers moving through a stream bed toward the marine wire, visible as dark shapes against lighter terrain. The pilot banks the aircraft into a left-hand pylon turn, aligning the miniguns with the target, and opens fire. The 3 guns converge their fire on a single point, each weapon spitting tracers that appear to pour from the sky like liquid fire. Every 5th round is a tracer, creating the illusion of a solid red stream. The actual bullet density is 5 times higher. The stream bed erupts in a continuous ripple of impacts, dirt and vegetation disintegrating under the torrent of fire. The column scatters, but the gunship follows, walking the stream of fire across the dispersed troops. The miniguns fire in bursts, 3 to 5 seconds on target, then pause to let the barrels cool and allow the sensor operator to assess damage and acquire new targets. Over the next 6 hours, the Spooky engages 11 separate targets. Mortar teams setting up, supply parties moving ammunition forward, and a truck convoy attempting to resupply NVA positions under cover of darkness. The gunship's presence forces the enemy to move slowly and cautiously, reducing their ability to mass forces for assault. When the AC-47 departs for refueling at 0200 hours, a second Spooky arrives to maintain continuous coverage. The NVA learn that darkness offers no sanctuary. American firepower persists around the clock, compressing their operational tempo and denying them the initiative. The cumulative effect of coordinated airstrikes becomes evident over the following week. NVA artillery fire, which averaged 300 rounds per day in late January, drops to fewer than 50 rounds per day by early February. Trench lines that advance to within 800 yards of the marine wire in mid-January are pushed back beyond 1,500 yards. Intercepted radio traffic reveals NVA units requesting permission to withdraw due to unsustainable casualties and supply shortages. The siege does not break the NVA, maintain their encirclement until April, but the intensity of their attacks diminishes as American air power erodes their combat capability faster than they can replace losses. The FAC system proves scalable. On February 5th, during a coordinated NVA assault on multiple outposts, 3 FACs work simultaneously over Khe Sanh, each controlling a different sector and coordinating with the others to avoid fratricide. Between them, they direct 427 strike sorties in 18 hours, delivering over 600 tons of ordnance. The NVA assault collapses under the weight of continuous bombardment, and ground forces report finding abandoned weapons and equipment in the trenches, evidence that enemy units broke and fled rather than face further airstrikes. The record day, January 21st, becomes a case study in air power coordination. Post-mission analysis reconstructs the FAC's timeline. 16 flights controlled in the first 2 hours, 32 flights between 0900 and 1200 hours, 41 flights in the early afternoon, and another 28 flights before the handover to night operations. Each flight averaged 2 to 4 aircraft, meaning the FAC managed between 174 and 348 individual aircraft over the course of his shift, depending on flight composition. The total ordnance delivered exceeds 800,000 pounds. High explosive bombs, napalm, cluster munitions, rockets, and cannon fire. The FAC's fuel log shows 4 refueling stops, each lasting 12 minutes on the ground, while the aircraft was serviced and the pilot briefed on new intelligence. Between stops, he flew continuously, orbiting the base in a pattern that varied altitude and heading to avoid predictable exposure to anti-aircraft fire. His radio log records 1,147 individual transmissions, an average of 1 every 38 seconds during his 8-hour shift. The mental workload is staggering, tracking multiple flights in 3-dimensional space, updating target priorities as new intelligence arrives, coordinating with artillery and ground forces, and maintaining situational awareness while maneuvering under fire. The NVA's perspective emerges from post-war accounts and captured documents. North Vietnamese commanders expected American air power, but underestimated its responsiveness. Traditional doctrine held that airstrikes required hours of planning and approval, allowing ground forces to maneuver between attacks. At Khe Sanh, the FAC compressed that cycle to minutes. A gun position that fired in the morning could expect retaliation within 10 minutes. A trench line observed at dawn would be cratered by noon. The NVA adapted by increasing camouflage and dispersion, but these measures reduced their offensive capability. Units spread across a wider area could not concentrate fire or mass for assault. One captured NVA after-action report notes, American aircraft appear in groups of 4 to 8, attacking the same target from different directions. We cannot predict their approach or prepare adequate defense. Losses among artillery crews exceed 50% in the first 2 weeks. Morale is poor. Soldiers refuse to man exposed positions during daylight. The report recommends abandoning the siege, but higher command overrules the request, viewing Khe Sanh as a strategic diversion that ties down American forces and draws attention from the upcoming Tet offensive. The siege continues, but the NVA shift from attempting to overrun the base to simply maintaining pressure while minimizing their own casualties. The FAC's effectiveness depends on integration with the broader air campaign. B-52 Arc Light missions strike suspected NVA base camps and supply depots beyond the range of tactical aircraft, each mission delivering 90,000 pounds of bombs from 3 aircraft flying in formation. The FAC coordinates with Arc Light planners to ensure that tactical strikes do not overlap with B-52 target boxes, which extend several miles on each side of the aim point. When a B-52 mission is inbound, the FAC clears all aircraft from the target area and waits for the bombs to fall. The explosions are visible from 30 miles away, a ripple of flashes followed by a rolling cloud of dust and smoke. The FAC then directs tactical aircraft to exploit the chaos, hitting NVA units as they attempt to regroup after the B-52 strike. Tanker support is equally critical. KC-135 Stratotankers orbit over the South China Sea and inland over Laos, refueling strike aircraft that would otherwise lack the range to reach Khe Sanh from bases in Thailand or carriers offshore. A phantom flight that burns through its fuel over target can divert to a tanker, top off, and return for a second mission. This extends the effective sortie rate, allowing the same aircraft to fly multiple missions per day. The FAC coordinates tanker rendezvous times to minimize gaps in coverage, ensuring that at least one flight is always overhead while others refuel. Weather remains the most unpredictable variable. Khe Sanh sits in the path of the northeast monsoon, which brings low clouds, rain, and fog from November through March. On days when the ceiling drops below 1,000 feet, jet aircraft cannot operate safely. They lack the visibility to acquire targets and risk controlled flight into terrain during pull-off. The FAC continues to work below the clouds, marking targets for radar-guided bombing by B-52 seconds or directing AC-47 gunships that can see through weather using starlight scopes and infrared sensors. On the worst days, when visibility drops to near zero, the FAC becomes the only American observer, relaying target coordinates to artillery and calling for fire missions that would normally be directed by ground-forward observers. The NVA exploit weather by increasing activity during low visibility periods. They move supplies, reposition artillery, and probe the marine wire, gambling that American aircraft will be grounded. The FAC counters by requesting all-weather strike packages. 4 seconds equipped with radar bombing systems that can deliver ordnance through solid cloud, and AC-47 seconds that hunt using sensors rather than visual acquisition. The result is a continuous contest of adaptation, each side seeking advantage in the narrow windows when weather favors their tactics. The siege's end comes not from a decisive battle but from gradual attrition and shifting strategic priorities. In early April 1968, the 1st Cavalry Division launches Operation Pegasus, a ground offensive to reopen Route 9 and break the NVA encirclement. The FAC's role shifts from defensive strikes around the base to offensive strikes, supporting the advancing cavalry. He directs aircraft against NVA blocking positions, artillery sites, and withdrawal routes, enabling ground forces to advance with minimal casualties. By April 8, the cavalry links up with the Khe Sanh garrison, and the siege is officially lifted. Post-operation analysis credits air power with preventing the base's fall. Over the 77 days of the siege, American aircraft flew 2,400 tactical sorties and 2,700 B-52 missions, delivering approximately 1,000 tons of ordnance within the Khe Sanh area of operations. The FAC system coordinated the majority of tactical strikes, maintaining continuous coverage and ensuring that ordnance was delivered against high-value targets rather than wasted on empty terrain. The NVA suffered an estimated 1,000 to 15,000 casualties, the majority from airstrikes, while American losses totaled fewer than 500 killed. The lopsided casualty ratio reflects the effectiveness of coordinated air power in a defensive siege. The lessons learned at Khe Sanh shape future doctrine. The FAC's role expands beyond simple target marking to include airspace management, strike sequencing, and real-time battle damage assessment. The Air Force formalizes training for FACs, emphasizing radio discipline, map reading, and the ability to manage multiple flights simultaneously. The O-1 Bird Dog, despite its vulnerability, remains in service throughout the war, valued for its low cost, simplicity, and ability to operate from short, unimproved airstrips. Later variants, including the OV-10 Bronco, offer better performance and survivability, but retain the same basic mission: slow, low, and persistent observation with direct communication to strike aircraft. The integration of sensors and all-weather strike systems becomes a priority. The success of AC-47 gunships at Khe Sanh leads to the development of more capable platforms, the AC-130 series that will eventually mount 40mm cannon and 105mm howitzers in later years. The concept of time-on-target strikes, proven effective during the siege, is incorporated into standard operating procedures for close air support, allowing multiple flights to deliver coordinated attacks that overwhelm enemy defenses. The FAC system, refined under fire at Khe Sanh, becomes the template for air-ground coordination in subsequent conflicts, demonstrating that a single observer with the right tools and training can orchestrate firepower far beyond his own platform's capability. The final flight over Khe Sanh on April 8th is routine, a single O-1 orbiting the base as the last NVA positions are cleared and Route 9 is declared open. The FAC radios a situation report. All targets suppressed. No enemy activity observed. Airspace is clear. He banks the bird dog toward the east, descending through broken clouds toward his home base at Dong Ha. Below, the scarred landscape tells the story. A 5-mile radius of craters, shattered trees, and abandoned trenches. The base itself is a patchwork of sandbags, bunkers, and pierced steel planking, battered but intact. The FAC logs his final entry: 8 hours airborne, 19 flights controlled, 42 strike aircraft directed, 0 friendly casualties. The numbers are unremarkable compared to the peak days of the siege, but they represent the same principle that held throughout: persistence, precision, and the ability to translate chaos into coordinated action. The NVA never understood that the single unarmed spotter plane circling overhead was not a target to be shot down, but a node in a system that could summon overwhelming force within minutes. That misunderstanding cost them the siege. Stories like this remind us that war isn't just about dates and numbers. It's about people, the split-second decisions that shaped entire battles. Every flight, every firefight, every tactic is a piece of a massive puzzle where one order could decide the fate of hundreds. We bring back these forgotten moments to show that behind every report and archive page stood real men, pilots, scouts, engineers, soldiers, whose courage and ingenuity changed the course of war, even if their names were never written in textbooks. Tell us in the comments, what moment of the Vietnam War impressed you the most? Or what operation should we cover next? Your ideas keep these stories alive. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe. It helps us uncover more forgotten chapters where history lives through those who fought it.